We are discussing skill sets. We talked about writing so far. The next element I'm going to highlight is research. You should develop the ability to conduct research. What is conducting research? It is the process of looking for information, analyzing such information and making sense of it. Now, a lot of the research that you're going to do is going to work around data. Data means pieces of information that you're actually going to put together and try to work with. So you gather data as part of the research process, you analyze the data, you interpret the data, and then you use data in your practice as a communicator. When we say communication is data driven, that means that you should really look at the evidence and find ways in which you can incorporate that evidence in building your communication. So the arguments you present, for instance, in your communication must be backed up by evidence. You should learn research skills in gathering information and determining the quality of such information. You would also want to learn how to design a research study and gather original data. This will be covered in depth in the module on research by Professor Basniat. I will also talk in a later section on how research informs the PR process. Now, one of the things you need to realize is that a lot of the research process involves interacting with numbers. So you need to make yourself pretty comfortable with numbers, because you are going to need to use numbers in order to drive your decision making. It so happens to be that for many students that come into communication, they dislike numbers or they have an allergy toward numbers. Now, one way of working through that allergy is by actually starting to look at numbers, exposing yourself to statistics, easy statistics like percentages and probabilities, and making sense of these in terms of how they can help you inform your communication process. Increasingly also, with the emergence of word of mouth communication on social media such as Facebook, for instance, referring to media such as Facebook and Weibo, where people simply talk to each other, you're expected as a PR practitioner to be able to interpret the data on patterns of interaction on these media. So you're expected to, for instance, listen in on patterns of conversation and make sense of them. These kinds of data, referred to as big data because of their sheer volume of information that you are going to gather, can provide you useful information and inputs about trends, processes of influence, who the influencers are, and the key ways in which you can exert this influence. So once again, research skills are really critical in the PR process, and you can develop these skills through practice and by exposing yourself to data patterns and making sense of them. The next thing I'm going to talk about is critical thinking and critical analysis. You're expected to develop an ability to critically analyze problems based on synthesis, which is putting things together, comparison by looking at things juxtaposed in the backdrop of each other, by comparing them, and integration by connecting and pulling them all together into a whole of your data points or pieces of information that you have gathered. And based on this synthesis, comparison and integration, you are expected to make decisions on the basis of the analysis you have conducted. Now, to critically analyze problems is to examine your own taken for granted assumptions on the basis of evidence at hand, to compare and contrast this evidence, and to arrive at conclusions that are driven by evidence. Now, in an increasingly global world where you are interacting with different cultures and subcultures, your critical analysis skills build into you an ability to question your taken for granted assumption. You have to develop this ability to question. You have to develop an openness of mind that is attentive to evidence and less committed to a particular ideology. In fact, you should be willing to throw out your assumptions if they are not borne out by evidence. Next, and this goes back to my earlier point about the emergence of social media, a successful PR practitioner today will have the necessary skill sets to understand digital and social media, to listen in on conversations on social media, and to engage the social media through communication. Now, one of the ways in which you can actually develop this is by practicing participating on social media, by posting out messages and testing out how people are responding to them. One of the things that I do with my Facebook posts or Twitter feeds is that I would post something, I would craft messages in particular ways and then look at how audiences are responding, and that helps me to learn by practicing. Now, to succeed as a PR practitioner, you'll also need to work on cultivating your problem solving ability, because a lot of what we do in PR is problem solving. The ability to look at problems carefully and to develop creative solutions for addressing the problems. So creativity is expressed in how you solve problems. Expose yourself to PR cases, meaning examples of how different companies or organizations solve their PR problems. Read news stories, because you will see plenty of examples of good and bad PR by looking at news stories. And pay attention to the PR activities that you see around yourself every day. These are great opportunities for learning. I, for instance, when I look at PR Week or PR Newswire and look at various stories about what various companies are doing about their PR practices, I find that I learn a lot. But of course, this learning then has to be aided by creative problem solving, knowing that I'm going to need to actually creatively respond when I'm given particular problems at hand. Finally, remember that PR practitioners are expected to develop a solid understanding of processes of PR in a global world. What this means is that you have to learn to be globally flexible and adaptive to different cultural contexts, to cultural nuances, and to meanings as they are constructed in these cultural contexts. You have to learn that communication, for instance, differs from culture to culture. And the way to respond to this wide diversity of communication, which really I find beautiful, is by learning to listen. Often, for instance, as practitioners of communication, we want to prescribe solutions or implement solutions without really having the patience to learn, without really questioning our own ethnocentrism or our own ethnocentric biases. So really use this opportunity to expose yourself to different cultures, cultural practices, and learn how to be adaptive and flexible. Once you learn that, you will find that you're bringing incredible skills of communication in the global workplace, in communicating, in building bridges, and in creating spaces for conversation across the globe.